They replaced me with a LinkedIn influencer in a tailored blazer, forgetting I still had access to the code repository they legally couldn't run without. Now I'm watching their app crash across 4 continents while sipping wine in my new office, the one I own. My name is Isabel Hartley. Until 4 months ago, I was the Chief Technology Officer at Neuroflux Systems, a medical AI company headquartered in Denver with offices spanning 4 continents. For 8 years, I built and maintained their entire technology infrastructure, a $1.3 billion AI diagnostic and cross-border medical data management system. I was 38 years old, with 3 patents to my name and the architect of what industry analysts called the most comprehensive medical AI framework ever developed. And then they fired me. Not for incompetence, not for ethical violations, not even for the corporate standby of culture fit. They fired me because I was deemed, and I quote from an email I wasn't supposed to see, aging infrastructure that needs to be replaced with a more marketable face. The marketable face they chose was Bryce Whitaker, 32, Wharton MBA. Zero coding experience, but 47,000 LinkedIn followers and a TED Talk about disrupting the disruptors. When I first met him 6 months before my termination, he asked me if our backend was cloud native and whether we had considered implementing a blockchain. Our system processed sensitive medical data across jurisdictions with varying privacy laws. We had built something that worked specifically because we understood the problems we were solving at a fundamental level. But Bryce had very white teeth and used phrases like synergistic alignment without irony. So the board loved him. What Bryce, the board, and especially our newly hired HR director Darla Riggs failed to understand was that I had designed the entire neuromesh system and I had built in what I like to call legislative compliance hooks. These were ostensibly security measures to ensure our system remained compliant with the complex web of international medical data regulations. But they also required my authentication signature for certain core functions to operate legally in international markets. And no one bothered to read the fine print in my termination agreement where they thought they had removed those hooks for domestic operations, but had left the international hooks intact. A slight rewording I'd inserted during contract negotiations 3 years prior when I sensed the winds shifting. The day they fired me was surprisingly ordinary. Denver in late September, the aspens turning gold in the distance, visible from our 43rd floor offices. I'd arrived early as usual, coffee in hand, already answering emails from our Singapore team before the elevator reached our floor. At 5:30 p.m., I received a calendar invitation titled, simply, Urgent Meeting, Boardroom C, no agenda, no attendees listed. Not unusual in our fast-paced environment, but something felt off. I saved my work, pushed my latest code changes to our repository, and headed to the familiar glass-walled room. Darla was there, perfectly coiffed in a navy pantsuit, tablet in hand. Beside her sat Bryce, his tailored blazer somehow making him look both professional and like he'd just stepped off a yacht. And then there was a woman I didn't recognize, who Darla introduced as Marianne from Legal. That's when I knew. Isabel, Darla began, not quite meeting my eyes. Neuroflux is undergoing strategic restructuring to streamline our technical processes and create a more agile framework for our next-generation products. Bryce nodded enthusiastically. We're evolving the paradigm, he added, contributing absolutely nothing. As such, Darla continued, sliding a document across the table. We'll be terminating your position effective immediately. Marianne will walk you through the severance package, which I think you'll find is quite generous. I didn't touch the papers. Instead, I remained seated, hands folded, face neutral, despite the rage bubbling beneath the surface. 8 years, I'd built their entire system from scratch. I'd slept under my desk during the FDA approval process. I'd missed my father's funeral to fix a critical bug during our European expansion. And who will be managing the neuromesh architecture? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I'll be stepping into the CTO role. Bryce smiled, showing those perfect teeth. We've already begun transitioning your responsibilities. The technical team seems excited about the new direction. My technical team, people I'd hired, trained, mentored. I see, I said slowly. And you're aware that NeuroMesh has certain authentication requirements built into its core architecture specifically. The distributed license verification systems that allow us to operate in 47 countries. Darla and Bryce exchanged a quick glance. Yes, we're aware. Darla replied, Section 4B of your termination agreement addresses the transfer of all authentication credentials and removes the dual authentication requirement for system modifications. For domestic operations, I corrected her. The International License Verification Protocol requires my biometric signature as the principal architect every 90 days. As per the regulatory agreements we established with the European Medical Data Commission and the Pan-Asian Health Informatics Consortium. That wasn't a Neuroflux policy. It was a legal requirement I built into the system to satisfy international regulatory bodies. This was true, partially. The regulatory bodies did require strict authentication protocols. My implementation of those requirements, however, had been my own design, one that ensured I remained indispensable. Bryce's smile faltered slightly. I'm sure we can handle a simple authentication transfer. I allowed myself a small smile. Of course, I'm sure your team will figure something out. We spent the next 20 minutes going through the motions. I signed the papers, handed over my company laptop, watch, and badge. Security escorted me to my office where I collected my few personal belongings, a succulent plant, a framed photo of my sister's family, a Denver Nuggets coffee mug, all while a nervous IT contractor changed passwords and revoked access privileges under Darla's watchful eye. As I walked out of the building I'd helped design, carrying a small cardboard box of memories, I felt strangely calm. They thought they'd taken everything from me. They had no idea what I still possessed. To understand what happened next, you need to understand where Neuroflux came from and what we had built together before everything soured. 8 years earlier, Neuroflux wasn't a gleaming skyscraper with 400 employees. It was 12 people in a converted garage in Boulder, operating on a shoestring budget and a shared vision. The founder, Dr. Marcus Levitt, had been my professor at Colorado School of Mines, where I'd earned my dual degrees in computer science and biomedical engineering. Marcus had an idea: create an AI system that could help doctors identify neurological conditions earlier by analyzing subtle patterns across thousands of data points. He had the medical expertise. I had the technical skills to make it happen. We started with a modest grant from the National Institutes of Health, barely enough to pay for server costs and ramen noodles. Those early days were magical. We worked 16-hour days fueled by passion and caffeine. Our first prototype successfully identified early markers of Parkinson's disease from a combination of voice recordings, gait analysis, and standard blood work, catching indicators that typically went unnoticed until the disease had significantly progressed. When we secured our first hospital partnership with Denver Memorial, I built the initial framework of what would become NeuroMesh. It wasn't just an AI diagnostic tool. It was a comprehensive medical data management system that could securely process patient information while navigating the labyrinthine regulations governing medical data. Marcus and I agreed on a core principle from the beginning: patient protection came before profit. We encoded this philosophy into the architecture itself. Every data interaction had to pass through multiple ethical filters. Every diagnostic suggestion had to include confidence intervals and potential alternative explanations. We built it to be a doctor's thoughtful assistant, never a replacement. As our success grew, so did our team. We hired brilliant minds who shared our vision. Jonas Flint joined as our second engineer, a coding savant with a gift for elegant solutions. Dr. Naomi Blair came aboard as our ethics specialist, ensuring our algorithms didn't perpetuate existing biases in medical data. Amira Walsh left a prestigious position at Mayo Clinic to become our operations director, believing in what we were building. 3 years in, we secured Series B funding, $47 million, that allowed us to expand our scope. I architected NeuroMesh 2.0, which introduced the distributed verification system that would later become so crucial. The system was designed with multiple redundancies and safety measures, including a dual authentication requirement for major system changes. Any significant modification needed approval from both the CEO Marcus and the chief architect me. This wasn't just technical paranoia, it was necessary for regulatory compliance. Medical AI systems that operate across borders must satisfy an intricate web of sometimes contradictory privacy laws and medical regulations. Our solution was elegant, a cascading authentication system with jurisdiction-specific compliance modules that adapted to local requirements while maintaining core functionality. By year 5, we'd expanded to 23 countries. The company had grown to over 200 employees. We moved from the Boulder garage to a sleek office in downtown Denver. Marcus appeared on the cover of Wired magazine. I was named one of MIT Technology Review's 35 Innovators Under 35. Then came the acquisition offers. Pharmaceutical giants, tech behemoths, everyone wanted a piece of what we'd built. Marcus and I agreed to maintain independence, but we did take on significant investment from Helix Ventures, diluting our control but providing the capital for global expansion. That's when things began to change. Helix brought in professional management to optimize operations. The board expanded to include 3 Helix partners. New C-suite executives arrived from companies that had nothing to do with healthcare, bringing corporate practices that prioritized quarterly results over long-term impact. Marcus still believed in our mission, but he was increasingly outnumbered in board votes. I remained focused on the technology, expanding NeuroMesh to handle more conditions, more data types, more jurisdictions. Our system was now operating in 47 countries, helping diagnose everything from rare genetic disorders to mental health conditions. We were saving lives daily. In year 7, I sensed trouble on the horizon. Marcus was being sidelined in key decisions. Board meetings became tense affairs dominated by discussions of monetization strategies rather than medical outcomes. Our user license agreements were quietly updated to allow for anonymized data sharing with strategic partners, pharmaceutical companies willing to pay for insights into disease patterns. I voiced my concerns, both technically and ethically. This wasn't what we had built NeuroMesh for. The response was bureaucratic new committees, review processes, alignment sessions that produced nothing but corporate doublespeak. That's when I made my decision. Over the next 6 months, I methodically updated the NeuroMesh architecture to include what appeared to be enhanced security measures but were actually my insurance policy. I created a secondary authentication system, Invisible. Unless you knew exactly where to look, that would gradually degrade international license verifications if my biometric signature disappeared from the system. I also established a personal backup of the entire codebase, storing it on private servers paid for with my personal credit card. Not company property, my intellectual contribution, preserved in its pure form, before corporate interests could corrupt it further. When Marcus resigned 8 months before my firing to pursue other opportunities, according to the press release, I knew my days were numbered. He called me the night before the announcement. I fought for as long as I could. "Izzy," he said, his voice heavy with defeat. "They're taking it in a direction I can't support. Quarterly profits over patient outcomes. I can't be part of that." "What should I do?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "Stay as long as you can. Protect what we built, but have an exit strategy." The next day, Bryce Whitaker was introduced as our new Chief Innovation Officer, a position created specifically for him. Within weeks, he was sitting in on my technical review meetings, asking questions that revealed his profound ignorance of our technology. Within months, he had the board's ear and was suggesting modernization initiatives that would effectively dismantle the careful ethical frameworks we'd established. And then came my firing, exactly as I had anticipated. The day after I was escorted from the building, I sat in my apartment overlooking Cherry Creek, laptop open, a glass of Cabernet in hand. I connected to my private server and accessed the NeuroMesh backup not to sabotage or steal, but to implement the contingency I designed months earlier. I wrote a simple conditional statement. If user primary, default null disable, global access, default true. In plain English, if my user profile was removed from the system, begin a cascading failure of the international licensing verification protocols. Not immediately, Not catastrophically, nothing so crude or traceable. Instead, the system would begin to experience subtle authentication failures across different regions, starting with our smallest markets. It would look like routine technical glitches, the kind that plague any complex system, the kind that the new CTO, with his limited technical understanding, would struggle to identify or resolve. I took a sip of wine, executed the code, and closed my laptop. Then I went for a long run along the river, watching the autumn leaves swirl in the current. I felt no guilt. I had built safeguards into my code to ensure no patient data would be compromised and no diagnostic functions would fail. Only the licensing and authentication systems would degrade the corporate functions, not the medical ones. 72 hours passed before the first issues appeared. A hospital network in London reported intermittent authentication failures. Their local Neuroflux representative assured them it was a minor glitch that would be resolved shortly. By day 5, similar reports came in from Paris, Berlin, and Stockholm. The pattern was too distributed for Neuroflux's technical team to identify a common cause. They implemented standard troubleshooting protocols, which temporarily resolved the issues before they reappeared in new locations. After the first week, the problem spread to our Asian markets, Tokyo, Seoul, Singapore. The Neuroflux stock price dropped 7% on rumors of technical instability in international markets. I received my first text from Jonas, who was still at Neuroflux. Whatever you did, it's working. Bryce is having daily meltdowns. 3 emergency all-hands meetings in 5 days. I responded with a single question mark. Plausible deniability. 10 days after my termination, I received an email from Darla Riggs. Subject consulting opportunity, Isabel. I hope this finds you well. Neuroflux is experiencing some technical challenges with the international authentication protocols you designed. Our team is working diligently to resolve these issues, but we believe your expertise could significantly expedite the process. We would like to engage you as a consultant at a rate of $7,000 per day to assist with these matters. This would be a short-term arrangement with the possibility of extension based on mutual agreement. Please let me know if you're interested, and we can have the paperwork prepared immediately. Best regards, Darla Riggs, Chief Human Resources Officer, Neuroflux Systems. I didn't respond. Instead, I used the time to formulate my next steps. I had savings, reputation, and knowledge. 3 powerful assets in the tech world. What I needed was a purpose that went beyond revenge. 2 weeks after my firing, Neuroflux's stock had dropped 19%. The technical issues had spread to all international markets, with hospitals and medical centers reporting increasing frustration with the system's reliability. The company issued a press release about system optimizations that would temporarily affect service, a transparent attempt to control the narrative. Then came the call from Bryce himself. I let it go to voicemail the first 3 times. On the 4th call, I picked up. Isabel, he said, his smooth voice now strained with panic. We need to talk. I believe we already did. Bryce, in boardroom C, remember? Look, there's been a misunderstanding. The board has reconsidered your position with the company. We'd like to offer you a new role, Chief Architectural Officer, reporting directly to me, but with full autonomy over the neuromesh system. Triple your previous equity, double the salary. I almost laughed. So you figured out the authentication issues. We're working through some technical challenges, he hedged. Your expertise would be invaluable in resolving them. My expertise was invaluable 3 weeks ago. Now it's suddenly worth double our Z. Isabel, please. We're talking about patient care systems. If you have any knowledge that could help resolve these issues. That's interesting, I interrupted. When I raised concerns about patient care being secondary to profit margins, I was told I didn't understand the new Neuroflux vision. Has that vision changed in the last 3 weeks? Silence on the line. I thought not. I continued. My answer is no. Bryce, I won't be returning to Neuroflux in any capacity. You wanted to replace the aging infrastructure. Remember, I suggest you figure out how that infrastructure actually worked. I hung up and blocked his number. Then I sent emails to 3 people, Jonas Flint, Dr. Naomi Blair, and Amira Walsh. Subject line, ready for something new. While Neuroflux struggled with cascading system failures, I set up shop in a co-working space in Boulder. Jonas joined me immediately. He'd been looking for an exit since I was fired. Naomi took some convincing. She worried about the patients currently relying on neuromesh. Once I explained that the diagnostic functions remained intact, only the corporate licensing was affected, she was on board. Amira was the last to join, resigning from Neuroflux exactly 1 month after my termination. We called our new venture Hartley Ethos. Not the most creative name, perhaps, but it embodied our mission to build medical AI systems with ethics at their core, not as an afterthought. I had no interest in simply recreating neuromesh. Instead, we designed something new. Open NeuroChain, a distributed medical AI framework with transparent governance built into its foundation. Every algorithm visible for peer review. Every data interaction logged and accessible to the patient. Ethical considerations encoded into the architecture itself, not added as a compliance layer afterward. We worked intensely for 6 weeks, leveraging our combined experience to build a prototype that addressed the shortcomings we'd observed at Neuroflux. No venture capital, no outside investors. We funded it ourselves, maintaining complete control. Meanwhile, Neuroflux's problems continued to escalate. An internal email leaked to TechCrunch revealed Bryce referring to me as a technical bottleneck that needed to be eliminated. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Their stock dropped another 11%. 2 months after founding Hartley Ethos, we secured our first client, a network of teaching hospitals in Germany, frustrated with Neuroflux's ongoing technical optimizations. 2 weeks later, we signed contracts with medical systems in France, Spain, and Brazil. By the end of the 3rd month, we had 19 clients across Europe and South America. We weren't just offering a technical alternative to neuromesh, we were proposing a philosophical one. Medical AI that prioritized patient outcomes and physician empowerment. Systems designed to augment human expertise, not replace it. Transparent algorithms that could be inspected and understood by the medical professionals using them. The contrast with Neuroflux became increasingly stark. While we grew through word of mouth in the medical community, they hired a crisis management firm and 3 separate technical consultancies trying to resolve their authentication anomalies. Their board held emergency sessions. Their stock continued to fall. 4 months after my firing, I received another call, this time from Marcus Levitt. "You did it, didn't you?" he asked without preamble. "Did what?" "Don't play dumb, Izzy. The authentication cascade. It has your fingerprints all over it." I said nothing. Marcus sighed, then chuckled softly. "It's brilliant, actually. Completely untraceable unless someone understands both the code and the regulatory framework, which Bryce definitely doesn't." "How's retirement?" I asked, changing the subject. "Boring as hell. That's actually why I'm calling. I've been approached by Glovantis. They're planning to acquire what's left of Neuroflux at a fire sale price. They want me as an advisor during the transition." Glovantis was one of the pharmaceutical giants that had tried to acquire us years earlier, a company known for aggressive pricing and questionable research practices. "And you're considering it?" I couldn't keep the disappointment from my voice. "No," Marcus replied. "I'm considering joining Hartley Ethos instead. If you'll have an old man who didn't fight hard enough for what we built." We met for dinner that night at a small Italian restaurant in Boulder, away from the Denver tech scene where we might be recognized. Over pasta and too much wine, I filled Marcus in on our new venture. He listened intently, asking occasional questions, his eyes lighting up with the same enthusiasm I remembered from our garage days. "This is what Neuroflux should have been," he said finally. "Patient-centered, ethically grounded, technically rigorous." "It's what Neuroflux was," I corrected him, before the board decided that quarterly growth was more important than patient outcomes. Marcus nodded solemnly. "I made mistakes, Izzy. I let them take control inch by inch, always believing I could pull it back if things went too far. By the time I realized I'd lost control completely, it was too late." "It's not too late now," I said. "We're building something better." The next day, Marcus Levitt joined Hartley Ethos as our ethics board chairman, a position we created specifically to ensure our mission never strayed from its patient-centered foundation. 1 week later, Glovantis announced its acquisition of Neuroflex Systems for $219 million, less than 1/6 of its peak valuation. Bryce Whitaker was not retained in the reorganization. Darla Riggs resigned the day before the acquisition was announced. As for me, I declined 7 acquisition offers for Hartley Ethos, including one with a valuation approaching 10 figures. We remained independent, focused on our mission rather than exit strategies. 6 months after my firing, I stood on a stage in Geneva at the International Conference on Medical AI Ethics, before an audience of physicians, researchers, regulators, and industry leaders. I introduced the Open Neurochain framework and announced the formation of the Medical AI Transparency Initiative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to establishing ethical standards for AI in healthcare. The promise of artificial intelligence in medicine isn't about replacing human judgment, I told the audience. It's about enhancing it, providing tools that extend what's humanly possible while preserving what makes healthcare human in the first place: empathy, ethical judgment, and the understanding that behind every data point is a person. Later that evening, at a reception overlooking Lake Geneva, I was approached by a woman I recognized as a member of the European Medical Data Commission, one of the regulatory bodies whose requirements had inspired my authentication safeguards. "Ms. Hartley," she said with a knowing smile, "I've followed your career with great interest, particularly recent events. The authentication protocols you designed for international compliance were quite innovative." I kept my expression neutral. I've always believed that robust security measures are essential for medical data systems. Indeed, she sipped her champagne, though I suspect some of those measures had dual purposes. All good architecture serves multiple functions, I replied carefully. She laughed softly. Well said. In any case, I wanted to personally invite you to join our technical advisory committee. We're drafting new regulations for cross-border medical AI systems, and your expertise would be invaluable. I accepted her offer, recognizing the opportunity to shape policy that would affect millions of patients worldwide. As I looked out over the lake that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. I hadn't set out for revenge when Neuroflux fired me. I had simply ensured that the system I built would function as designed, with all its careful checks and balances intact. That those checks and balances ultimately led to Neuroflux's downfall was a consequence of their own decisions, not mine. I didn't need to destroy what I had built. I just needed to protect it until I could build something better. Now, 1 year after my unceremonious exit from the 43rd floor, I sit in my own office, a converted Victorian in Boulder, with views of the Flatirons. Hartley Ethos has grown to 68 employees across 3 countries. Open Neurochain is operating in 39 countries, helping diagnose and treat conditions that once went undetected until it was too late. Marcus stopped by my office this morning, coffee in hand, to share the news Glovantis is discontinuing what remains of the NeuroMesh system, transitioning all their clients to a new proprietary platform. Full circle, he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. Not quite, I replied. We're just getting started. The system I built was never about the code itself. It was about the principles encoded within it: patient protection, ethical boundaries, transparency. When Neuroflux abandoned those principles, the system became unsustainable, regardless of who had access to the authentication protocols. They replaced me with a LinkedIn influencer in a tailored blazer, believing that presentation mattered more than substance. They were wrong. In healthcare, in technology, in life, substance always prevails in the end. I didn't take their source code offline out of spite. I simply returned it to its original purpose, serving patients, not profits. And in doing so, I found my own purpose again. Some might call it revenge. I call it recalibration. The system is working exactly as designed.